The night that changed everything in my life began with laughter and ended in shame. It's strange how one moment can shift the course of your future, how the world can go from sparkling and full of possibility to something cold and merciless, all in the space of a single evening. If I close my eyes, I can still hear the music. The jazz band's saxophone rising over the soft clink of champagne flutes, the buzz of voices swirling around me as we sailed just off the coast of Miami, the city lights painting the horizon in gold and blue. It was supposed to be a celebration, a tribute to my father's latest business triumph, and perhaps, in a way, a welcome into the world of adulthood for me. I was 26, standing on the threshold of my own life, or so I thought. My father, Richard Harrison, was always a man who liked to do things in style. The cruise ship was enormous, 3 decks of gleaming wood and shining glass, every detail perfect. I remember how the waiters glided across the floor in crisp white jackets, offering platters of shrimp and tiny steak bites, while women in sequined gowns drifted from table to table, their laughter light as bubbles. My dress was midnight blue, simple but elegant, something my mother would have loved. The memory of her was never far from me, especially on nights like these. But nothing about the evening felt right to me. I felt out of place, almost like a stranger among my own family. My stepmother, Victoria, seemed to own the party, moving through the crowd with her head high, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat. She flashed her bright, practiced smile at every guest and every camera. Her daughter, my stepsister, Laura, stood near the dance floor, always in Victoria's shadow, but tonight she glowed with a sort of secret pride, like someone who knew a punchline the rest of us hadn't heard yet. I remember standing at the edge of the deck, my glass of sparkling cider untouched in my hand. I've never cared for champagne, much to my stepmother's annoyance. The cool breeze tangled my hair, and for a moment, I tried to lose myself in the view. The endless ocean, the Miami skyline in the distance, the stars just beginning to appear. I thought, maybe just for a second, that I could slip away from the tension and just be myself. But the world had other plans. The band stopped suddenly, and all eyes turned toward the small stage at the center of the main deck. My father took the microphone, his presence instantly commanding attention. He was a tall man, with a square jaw and silver hair, dressed in a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. I saw him scan the crowd, his eyes cold and sharp, finally landing on me. "I'd like to say a few words," he announced, his voice echoing over the speakers. The crowd quieted. Even the sea seemed to hush for him. "Tonight isn't just about business or about me," he began. I tried to smile, hoping that maybe this time he would say something kind, something that would make up for the distance between us since my mother died. But I should have known better. He turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "Sophie," he said, loudly and clearly so that everyone could hear, "you're a loser and a disgrace to our family." The words hit me like a slap. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The room, or rather, the whole ship, fell into a hush so deep I could hear my own heart pounding. My cheeks burned with humiliation, and I wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the ocean air. All around me, people stared. Some looked away quickly, pretending not to notice, while others watched with curiosity or, worse, a kind of satisfaction. Beside my father, Victoria gave a small, cruel smile. She always loved moments like this, when I was the one being humiliated, when she could stand next to my father and play the part of the perfect wife. Laura looked at me with a mixture of triumph and pity, her lips curled into a half smirk. My father didn't stop there. "From this moment on," he continued, "Laura is the heir to all of my property. She has proven herself worthy, responsible, and loyal to this family. Everything I have worked for, every dollar, every house, every business, will belong to her." A low murmur ran through the guests. Some of them glanced at me, their eyes wide, while others seemed almost relieved. Maybe now, with Laura in charge, there would be fewer scandals, fewer awkward silences at family gatherings. My mind reeled. I thought of all the years I had tried to make him proud, of the time I'd spent managing his charities and helping at his company, always in the background, always outshone by Laura's constant need for attention. Victoria placed her hand on my father's arm, her voice pitched just loud enough for everyone to hear. "I won," she said with a laugh, "and your dead mother lost." The words were like daggers, cruel and unnecessary, designed to cut me down one last time. She laughed again, a cold, triumphant sound that made my skin crawl. The guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one said a word. My humiliation was complete. As the party went on, I faded into the background, invisible. I saw people whispering behind their hands, saw old friends of my mother look at me with something close to pity, while others simply turned away. I wandered to the edge of the deck, away from the music and the laughter, and stared out at the dark water. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I thought about my mother, how she would have hated to see me treated like this, how she always said I was stronger than I thought. The night grew colder as the ship drifted along the coast. I stayed outside, shivering, listening to the waves and the distant city lights, feeling utterly alone. I promised myself, in that moment, that I would never let them break me, no matter how hard they tried. That night, I didn't sleep. Long after the last guest had left and the lights on the ship had dimmed, I sat on the empty deck, watching the stars fade into the early morning sky. I wrapped my arms around myself, wishing for my mother's warmth, but all I felt was cold. And that was the night everything changed. When I woke up the next morning, the world looked different. The sunshine poured through the tall windows of our old Savannah mansion, splashing gold on the hardwood floors and the ivory walls. It should have felt warm, but the air in the house was thick and heavy, weighed down by the memory of last night's humiliation. My father's words, sharp as broken glass, still echoed in my mind. I felt exposed, like the whole city must know that I was a disgrace, and that I no longer belonged to the family I'd grown up in. I took my time getting ready, mostly because I couldn't bear the thought of facing anyone. When I finally left my room and walked down the long hallway, I could hear Laura's voice from the sitting room, chattering away on her phone, as if she already owned the place. The heels of her shoes clicked against the marble floors, confident, entitled, a sound I'd never much liked. She was always at home in the spotlight, and after last night, she was basking in it more than ever. Victoria was already in the breakfast room, sitting at the head of the table with a glass of orange juice in one hand and her phone in the other. She was humming some old jazz tune, and even her humming sounded smug. The kitchen staff hovered around her, refilling her glass, fussing over her every whim. When I walked in, she didn't look up, just kept humming, as if I were invisible. I sat at the far end of the table and poured myself some coffee, my hands trembling slightly. The clinking of the spoon against the cup seemed much louder than usual. My father was nowhere to be seen. I assumed he was locked away in his study, hiding behind the excuse of urgent business calls. That was his way, always avoiding confrontation in the aftermath, letting Victoria and Laura do the dirty work. For the first time, I realized how alone I truly was in this house. Even the staff seemed to keep their distance, unsure of where to place their loyalty now. Breakfast passed in uncomfortable silence. Laura eventually drifted in, wearing a silk robe that wasn't hers, probably one of Victoria's, but I knew she'd claim it soon enough. She flopped into a chair, scrolling through her phone, not even bothering to greet me. I tried to eat, but my stomach was in knots. Every bite of toast felt dry and tasteless. The quiet was broken by the sudden, sharp sound of the doorbell. Everyone froze. In this house, guests were always expected, never a surprise. The butler moved quickly, but Dad beat him to the door, opening it with a scowl already on his face. I could see from where I sat, the morning light spilling onto the front porch and two men standing there in matching dark suits, holding leather briefcases. Something about them felt official, too official for Savannah, a city that still prided itself on its old Southern charm. "Who are you?" Dad demanded, his tone clipped and impatient. Victoria glanced up, suddenly alert. The taller of the two men stepped forward, his expression polite but firm. "We're the attorneys for Margaret Harrison's estate," he said, and just the sound of my mother's name made my heart lurch. I felt everyone's attention shift. Victoria's face tightened, her lips drawing into a thin line. "That woman is dead," Victoria said sharply, her voice slicing through the air like a knife. "There's no reason for you to be here. You're wasting your time." But the lawyers weren't looking at her. They were looking at me. The shorter man, who wore thin silver glasses and had a gentle, almost kind face, spoke up. "Are you Sophie Harrison?" he asked. I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. "Yes, I'm Sophie." He smiled in a way that seemed genuinely reassuring. "Miss Harrison, may we come in? We have some important matters to discuss regarding your late mother's estate." Victoria tried to protest again, but Dad held up a hand, as if even he sensed that something serious was unfolding. The lawyers walked past the foyer and into the breakfast room, placing their briefcases on the gleaming mahogany table. Laura looked up from her phone, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. The taller lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "Miss Harrison, your mother left behind a document that was to be delivered only under very specific circumstances. We've reviewed her instructions thoroughly. According to this will, you are to inherit the entire estate belonging to your mother, Margaret Harrison, including this house and all related investments." The room seemed to stop breathing. Victoria's orange juice slipped from her hand, the glass shattering on the table. Dad just stared at the envelope, as if it were a live grenade. Laura's fork clattered to her plate, her mouth falling open. For a long moment, no one spoke. I felt a rush of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a wild, impossible hope fluttering in my chest. The lawyer continued, his voice steady. "Your mother's assets are substantial, Miss Harrison. You are now the sole owner of this house, as well as several bank accounts, stocks, and properties. The total estimated value is over $7 million, though that number may grow once her overseas accounts are settled." Victoria found her voice first.
"No."
"That's impossible. Margaret never mentioned anything about a will, and Richard was always supposed to manage her affairs." Her voice grew shrill and desperate. "This is some mistake. I demand to see the documents." The shorter lawyer handed her a copy of the will. Victoria scanned the pages with shaking hands, her eyes darting back and forth as if she could will the words to change. But there it was in black and white, my name listed as the sole beneficiary. Dad looked at me, his face pale, a mixture of shock and something else. Fear, maybe, or regret. Laura, always quick to adjust, tried to sound casual. "So what does this mean? Are we still allowed to live here? I mean, it's not like anything really changes, right?" But I knew, even as the question hung in the air, that everything had changed. For the first time, I felt something fierce rising inside me, a sense of power, of justice. I looked at the lawyers, then at my family. My hands stopped shaking. As the attorneys packed away their briefcases, I thanked them quietly. They told me they'd be in touch soon to finalize the paperwork. Victoria, white as a ghost, whispered something under her breath and disappeared down the hall. Dad said nothing, his eyes never leaving the floor. Laura pushed away from the table and stormed upstairs, slamming her door behind her. I sat alone in the silence, the sun still pouring through the windows, my heart pounding with relief and grief, and something entirely new. Hope. My mother, even in death, had protected me. And for the first time in years, I realized I was finally, truly not alone. The day that began with shock soon moved with a momentum all its own. I never imagined how quickly the lawyers would move, how efficiently the world could change in just a few hours. After the reading of my mother's secret will, the men in suits remained in the house, moving between their briefcases and the old study, making calls to banks and clerks, and even the county courthouse. For the first time since my mother's funeral, the mansion felt alive with a sense of purpose that wasn't about my father's business deals or Victoria's endless parties. This time it was about me, and about what my mother had left behind for me. Victoria tried everything. She screamed, at first, loud enough that I wondered if the neighbors could hear. She accused the lawyers of fraud, waving her perfectly manicured hands, demanding to speak to their supervisors or anyone who could fix this ridiculous mistake. Her voice echoed off the high ceilings and marble floors, but the lawyers only grew calmer and measured in their responses. They repeated themselves, patiently explaining that Margaret Harrison's will had been properly filed, that all the documents were in order, that everything had already been confirmed by the court. Her power, which had always seemed so solid, started to crumble right there in the middle of our ornate living room. My father tried to bargain, which surprised me most of all. The same man who had called me a loser less than 24 hours before now stood before me looking old and tired, his confidence stripped away. "Sophie," he began, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "We can talk about this. This house, it's been in our family for generations. Maybe there's a way to work something out." I stared at him, feeling an ache in my chest that was not quite anger and not quite pity. He'd always expected me to fade into the background, to take whatever scraps of affection or approval he offered. But now the tables had turned, and I could see the fear behind his eyes. For the first time in my life, I was not the one waiting to be chosen. I was the one choosing. Laura was perhaps the most pitiful of all. She didn't scream like Victoria or plead like my father. She simply stood by the staircase, silent and pale, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. When she spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Sophie, please don't do this. We're sisters, aren't we?" Her voice trembled, and I almost believed her for a moment, almost. But I remembered her laughter on the cruise, her smug smile as my father announced her as the heir. I remembered all the times she'd stood by and watched me shrink in their presence, never once offering a hand. The lawyers gathered us all in the living room for the final formality. The papers were signed, notarized, and witnessed. The house, all the assets, the accounts, everything was officially legally mine. The entire process felt strangely ceremonial. The living room, with its high ceilings and sunlight pouring through the tall windows, became my throne room, and the people who had always held power over me now seemed small and uncertain. I stood in the center of the room, my room now, and faced them all. Dad, Victoria, Laura. They looked at me, eyes wide, waiting for some kind of mercy. My hands no longer trembled. I spoke clearly, my voice echoing through the space that had always belonged to them. "I want you all to get out of this house," I said. "You can take whatever you came with. Nothing else belongs to you." Victoria exploded. "You ungrateful brat," she screamed. "You think you can just erase us? After everything we've done for you?" Her face was red, her hands shaking with rage. "This isn't over. You'll regret this, you'll see." My father just looked tired. His shoulders slumped, and he stared at the floor. I wondered, for just a moment, if he was finally thinking about my mother. Not Victoria, not Laura, not his reputation or his money, but the woman he had once loved enough to build this house with. But if he was, he didn't say anything. He just nodded, his eyes dull, and turned away. Laura burst into tears. "Please, Sophie, please let me stay. I don't have anywhere else to go." Her voice was shrill, panicked, the voice of someone who had always relied on being protected, on having someone else to clean up her messes. But I didn't flinch. I'd spent too many years swallowing my pain, too many years letting them tell me who I was and what I was worth. "You all made it clear last night what you think of me," I said quietly. "This is my house now, my mother's house, and you're not welcome here anymore." It took less than an hour for them to gather their things. I watched from the upstairs landing as Victoria barked orders at the house staff, demanding her favorite jewelry and designer shoes be packed with extra care. Dad moved slowly, as if he were already carrying the weight of a new life he never wanted. Laura just sat on the bottom step, crying until Victoria finally snapped at her to get up and help. When the door finally closed behind them, the silence was deafening. I stood in the foyer, surrounded by all the echoes of my childhood, the portraits, the vases, the worn carpet runner on the stairs. Every object felt different now, not just a reminder of the family I had lost, but of the future I could finally claim for myself. My hands shook again, but this time it was from the overwhelming sense of release, not fear. That night, The mansion felt impossibly large and quiet. I wandered through the rooms, touching the walls, running my fingers over the polished wood banister, feeling the texture of my history. I sat down at the grand piano in the parlor, the same one my mother used to play on quiet Sunday mornings. I let my fingers rest on the cool keys, remembering the soft sound of her favorite songs drifting through the house. For the first time in years, I let myself cry, not out of sadness, but out of relief and gratitude, and a grief that was finally allowed to heal. As the moonlight streamed through the windows, I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. I felt my mother with me, her presence gentle but strong, a reassurance that I was exactly where I was meant to be. For the first time in my life, I was truly home. After my family left, the world outside my doors seemed to shift and rearrange itself. The grand old house, once full of voices that made me feel small, now echoed with possibility. For a few days, I wandered the empty halls, half in disbelief. Sometimes, I would pause in front of a window, feeling the sun on my face, and whisper to myself, "This is mine. This is really mine." With every passing hour, it became less about what I had taken back from my father and more about what I wanted to create for myself. The news traveled quickly through Savannah. In a city that thrived on old money and old gossip, my story spread like wildfire. I could almost feel it drifting down the leafy streets, whispered between neighbors on their porches, and passed quietly over garden fences. People who had barely acknowledged me at charity events now smiled when they saw me at the grocery store. I got invitations to brunches and parties from women who had once looked through me as if I were invisible. It would have been easy to enjoy their sudden attention, but I couldn't shake the knowledge that their kindness was as thin as the china teacups they clinked at their garden parties. Their warmth was not for me, but for my newfound wealth and the mystery of my mother's secret will. I stopped caring about Savannah's opinions. For the first time, I didn't need their approval, and that freedom was worth more than all the dollars in my accounts. Instead, I turned my thoughts inward. What did I want, really? What dreams had I set aside while I tried to make everyone else happy? The answers came slowly, like the tide rolling in. I wanted to see the world, to learn and grow beyond the walls of my childhood home. I wanted to know who I could become when I wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. So I made plans. I met with the lawyers again, not to fight or defend, but to organize, invest, and prepare. I gave the house staff a choice. They could stay, or I'd help them find new jobs. No hard feelings. Most chose to stay, saying the house felt lighter, as if a storm had finally passed. With their help, I restored some of the rooms, opening curtains that had been closed for years and letting in the sunlight. My mother's portrait, which Victoria had banished to the attic, was cleaned and rehung above the fireplace in the main hall. Her gentle smile seemed to bless the change. When everything was in order, I packed my bags and traveled. I started in New York City, a place my mother once dreamed of showing me. I wandered through art galleries and crowded markets, ate pizza on street corners, and let the city's energy seep into my bones. I took a painting class in Greenwich Village and made friends with other women starting over, some older, some younger, all of us searching for ourselves. Next, I flew to London. The city's history pressed in on me as I walked along the Thames, visited old bookstores, and drank tea in cozy cafes. I felt close to my mother there, as if I could sense her in every brushstroke at the National Gallery and every flower in Hyde Park. I spent long afternoons sketching, filling journals with memories and dreams. I crossed the Channel and spent a month in Paris, living in a tiny rented apartment above a bakery. I learned to order coffee in French, made mistakes, and laughed at myself. In the evenings, I sat in little squares and watched the world go by, feeling for the first time that I was exactly where I belonged, even if only for a short while. But no matter where I went, whether it was the dazzling lights of Broadway, the gray mist over the London Eye, or the golden glow of a Paris sunset, I thought of home. I thought of the other women who might be walking through the world carrying the kind of pain and loneliness I had known. I remembered how lost I had felt, how desperate for a place to belong. And so, when I finally returned to Savannah, I knew what I wanted to do. I decided to turn my mother's house into something new, a place where women could heal and start over, just as I had. It started with a simple idea: a shelter, a retreat, a home for women in transition. Not just a roof and four walls, but a sanctuary full of beauty and kindness. I reached out to counselors, social workers, and local organizations. I renovated and used rooms, filling them with warm light, fresh flowers, and soft beds. I painted the old guest rooms in bright, hopeful colors. I built a studio for art and music, remembering how those things had helped me find myself again. I called the project Margaret's House after my mother. Soon, women from all walks of life began to arrive, some escaping broken marriages, some fleeing loneliness, others simply needing a safe place to find their footing. They brought their children, their stories, and their hopes. The house filled with laughter, tears, and the quiet strength that grows when people know they are safe and accepted. Watching these women transform was the greatest gift I could have imagined. Together, we shared meals in the old dining room. We worked in the garden, planting roses and hydrangeas. We celebrated birthdays and small victories. The echoes of past arguments and cold silences were slowly replaced by music, conversation, and the gentle hum of life returning. As for my father, Victoria, and Laura, I rarely thought of them. Rumor had it they moved to a small apartment in Atlanta. Sometimes I would see their names in the society pages, always attached to someone else's party or cause, but it meant nothing to me. I didn't waste my energy on revenge or regret. That chapter was over. I found peace in simple things: early morning walks by the river, evenings spent reading by the fire, watching the women of Margaret's house find their voices and make their plans. I knew my mother would have been proud, not just because I had protected her legacy, but because I had used it to help others rise. In the end, happiness came not from winning, but from living a life that felt honest and free. I was no longer the quiet, forgotten daughter, nor the loser standing on the deck of a cruise ship. I was Sophie Harrison, strong, independent, and finally at home.